First up, I want to acknowledge the Yarrakia traditional owners of the land and all the TOs here today. Also a special thank you to Moko, Urga, and Linda and their team for putting on such an important conference. Myself, I'm excited to have a chance to revisit my PhD thesis, which I began here, well actually it's the Miley Point campus, 27 years ago, under the watchful eye of my mentor, David Guramara of Oklahoma. I also want to recognize that Guramara's son and daughter-in-law are here, Terry and Claire. So it's a great honor to be with you tonight. Now my topic is women as mediators in Yolngu cosmology. And I'll take a fairly circuitous route. That's the US route. A circuitous route to get there. Not the direct. I'm going to come around like this to get to that. So in anthropology, cosmology is another word for religion. It's the study of the big questions. Who we are as human beings. What are we doing here? And where will we go? That's cosmology. Like with the idea of culture, cosmology consists of learned ways of knowing, believing, and understanding, which my mentor David Guramara said were three very different things. Knowing, believing, and understanding. So for Guramara, he would describe the difference by reference to the idea of epiphany. Epiphany. The sudden awareness or realization after which the world is seen in an entirely new way. Knowing something of the law comes in one's youth with education and experience and especially good behavior. Believing comes later, usually after one has a family of one's own and responsibilities at a community. This is because the knowledge that you share is often the backbone of the community. Finally, after much reflection, comes understanding of the deeper dimensions of the law. Though understanding is not guaranteed. This is a step beyond blind faith to creatively engaging with the truth. This is the realm of the lawmaker, where sacred narratives emerge. So, understanding in Guramara's view is usually the result of epiphanies, as I said. By epiphany, Guramara was speaking in the Christian sense, like, for example, Jesus and John the Baptist on the Jordan River, or Paul on the road to Damascus. But Guramara was speaking of an equivalent revelation from within Yolngu cosmology, and I'll come back to his epiphany later. I have to say at the outset that Guramara was a remarkable man. Every university teaching Aboriginal studies should have a course on Warragiri thought. As will become clear, Guramara was an extremely learned man, and people like that don't come along too often. And in this talk, I want to give you just a small taste of his philosophy. So, as in all religions, the search for answers to the fundamental questions gives meaning to our lives. We orient ourselves towards each other, towards the land and the sea, and to the heavens above, in terms of this knowledge that we share. When discussing Yolngu cosmology, we must acknowledge that there are many different worlds in Northeast Island, and of course many different interpretations of major themes, and these change over time. While there are certain overarching sets of beliefs celebrated by all Yolngu, there are Dua and Yirritja Moiety clans as different as day and night. Think of the black and the white cockatoo or the sun and the moon, which are symbols of these blocks of clans. Then we have saltwater and freshwater peoples, each with a unique history and identity. There's the Manjike or mangrove Yirritja clans and the stone country and rainbow serpent peoples. And they're all connected in significant ways by songs, story, marriage, and history. For this talk, I'm focusing in on what we call the Bayani clans. those inspired by the golden-skinned female deity Baby, who provides the rationale for the mediating role of Yolngu women during historical contacts with outsiders. So this is an image you can see of the Baby men and women. The Baini clans are the Warramiri, the Wanguri, the Dalwangu, Birkili, Lamamiri, and Gumich. The Baini clans are the Morrigan, made famous in Lloyd Warner's Black Civilization. He called them Mungin, but it's Morrigan, or Iron Age people. They were distinguished then by a belief in the high God in the heavens above that goes way back in time before the missionaries. As Burumara would say, we are Morrigan, we believe in God. So as I said, there are many intersecting worlds in our land, many different truths. My work with Burumara was focused on pan-Yolngu beliefs linked to his clan that arose in the wake of contact with non-Aboriginal peoples from Indonesia and elsewhere. And you'll see references to these beliefs in the flags that you'll see flying right across Arnhem Land, and in the centre of communities you'll sometimes see a ship's mast, for example. The Warramiri is the principal owner of these beliefs. Working with Burumara in the 1980s was very challenging because there were so few shared assumptions when we began our extended conversation. We had completely different backgrounds, as you can imagine. There was only friendship, trust, and a willingness to share deep knowledge about ourselves and of our worlds. For 7 years, we met almost daily to converse on a range of subjects and to work on projects, including his biography, his life story, called The Whale and the Cross, which recognised the two most significant influences in his life, whale totem and Christianity. The book launch was here at CDU and was attended by major politicians, administrators, and intellectuals. So the division between men's business and women's business in Yolngu society is very pronounced. I remember when we were writing The Whale and the Cross, I asked Burumara to list the most influential people in his life, all of his mentors. And very quickly, he gave me the list of 30 plus Yolngu men, his mentors from multiple Yolngu clans, and also several missionaries, but no women, not one woman. So I pushed him on this, and I remember that he looked puzzled. The question was incomprehensible to him because women have their own business, to which he was not privy, though he did admit to knowing about love magic. In the end, after I kept on, he added the name of his father's sister and his mother to his list of teachers, but it was only under duress. Fortunately, we have a growing body of Yolngu women who are providing deep insight into aspects of women's business, but of course there's still a lot of work to be done, and this project represents a great step forward. So, again, I'm only about here in the trajectory of coming around, so you've got to bear with me, coming around with a big circle. So in order to understand the stories I will share with you about women's roles as mediators, it's important to have insight into what I call the Titanic Embrace. The famous anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss spoke at length about totemism as the special relationship that exists between people and their totems. In southern Africa, the Bushmen or San people are recorded as saying, "The life of an elephant is the life of a man." And this is similar to what Lévi-Strauss reports from Victoria in Australia, where the Aboriginal people say that the life of an owl is a woman's life. You'll hear Yolngu speak like this too. The shark is my mother. Or for the Baini peoples, I am a sword or an anchor. Such a simple statement lies at the core of Aboriginal spirituality. But what does it mean? The Titanic Embrace, as I call it, this link between the person and the totem, is revealed in the story of how Urumara's father was gifted a mirror by a visiting Macassan tree-paying fisherman sometime in the late 1800s. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with the story of Macassans. Yes, I'm sure you're all familiar with the story of the Macassans. Started arriving on the Ireland coast about the 1750s. This was the first international industry in Australia, the tree-paying trade, and it lasted until 1907. This is an idealized image of what a tree-paying processing camp was like in the Mediators. That's what they were after. Holothuria scabra, the less said about it there. And of course, in some cases, deep friendships that lasted decades. From a visit by a descendant of one of the last captains who was visiting Yolngu. So, the gift of the mirror. Back to the gift of the mirror. How did we get to talking about mirrors, Urumara and I? Of course, when you're writing a biography of someone, a life history, you talk about everything. In this case, one morning in those 7 years, sometime in that 7-year period, we were talking about Urumara's favourite anthropology textbook. And it was Clyde Crookhorn's Mirror for Man, which had been given to him by the anthropologist Ronald Burnett in the 1950s. And you can see them both together, Urumara and Burnett, with their smoking pipes. It was Urumara who introduced me to Ronald Burnett, and Burnett gave me my first anthropological assignment. This was a small contract to determine access to sacred bark paintings in his museum. And one of the major questions was, were women allowed to access these paintings? And according to Yolngu elders, the answer was yes, if they were on anthropological research. Great, back to mirrors. So, Urumara's father gifted a mirror by Macassans, sometime in the late 1800s. Now you have to understand that mirrors are very special. When encountered for the first time, mirrors are something of a revelation. Accounts from around the world show a similar pattern. People felt that they are looking into their very soul. That their soul was somehow trapped inside the mirrored surface. Now, on the chance that he might know, I asked Urumara, what did his father see in the mirror? That sounds like a strange question. What did your father see in the mirror when he first looked in it? And Urumara didn't hesitate. He said that his father saw an octopus. Astonished by this, it's quite a spooky image here, the soul trapped inside the mirror. Astonished by this, I asked Urumara, what did he see in the mirror? When he looked into a mirror even today, he said, I also see an octopus. Now, Urumara and I had a very special relationship, and we could joke on many subjects. But in this case, I pushed back. I said, look, you don't look like an octopus. And he replied that he did, and that the only reason that I could not see the resemblance was my own ethnocentrism, which is an anthropological term. I was seeing the world only through my own cultural lens, which is a big mistake for anthropologists. Urumara considered himself to be Australia's first Aboriginal anthropologist, and his criticism was spot on. But still I pressed him on the point. I drew a picture of the octopus in the sand, and he said, that's me, and I can prove it. And he said, just ask that seagull boy over there, or that dolphin woman. They'll tell you who I am. And of course they did. So, I'm completely puzzled at this point. So I asked him, what is that 8-armed thing that lives out in the sea? And he said, it is that part of the human that makes its home in the reef and swims around like this. So I asked him, well, what is a human being? And he said, it is that part of the octopus that walks around on the land singing the octopus songs. That's what a man is. That part of the octopus that walks around on land singing octopus songs. The Titanic Embrace. This is very deep. I am the octopus. And yet, this is at the heart of Aboriginal spirituality. So you see the connection is? In Burumara's mind's eye, the octopus and the human being form one indivisible whole. In Yolngu cosmology, traditional, there is no concept of the individual, as we might understand it here. A totem is not just a group label, it is part of how you define yourself in a spiritual, physical, and communal sense. In a traditional totemic worldview, Aboriginal people are not solely self-contained units, but rather part of something much larger than themselves, as in any great world religion. You'll learn about your totemic connections as a child, and maybe later, believe it. But to understand what this really means, its deeper significance comes in the form of an epiphany. For Burumara, it's Burumara, with our treaty flag, one treaty flag, octopus design. But for Burumara, the epiphany came in the 1930s in Bilingimbi, while watching his uncle Malungi from the Birikili clan doing the whale dance. As Burumara recalled, Malungi danced so well that he understood immediately. Malungi was the whale. There were no doubts. I want to choose this picture because you recognise Brendan? Who knows who this is? This is Baekju from the Birikili clan. He was a contemporary of Burumara's father, a little bit younger, but a contemporary, and his great-grandchild's in the room. Jalangi's grandfather. So Burumara had no doubts when Malungi is doing that dance. He knew it was an epiphany. So, and with this epiphany came a realization that Burumara was integrated into the vast, interrelated web of life, and inseparable from the forces that animated and supported everything around him. Anthropologists use the word dividual to explain this duality, a person and their totem. But there is so much more to it. It's a beautiful philosophy, and one that has sustained Aboriginal life for more than 50,000 years. Perhaps in a simplified form, this is what migrating peoples brought with them out of Africa 120,000 years ago. All religions emerged from this foundation. For example, ideas like of the soul or of salvation have their origins in this philosophy. So Aboriginal religion, like all religions, is all-encompassing, explaining all things in creation. It's the same in Christianity, of course, where God is said to pour out his spirit on all peoples. Hindus say that everyone possesses a soul that is part of the supreme soul called Brahman, while Buddhists and Sikhs believe that their teachings are relevant to all peoples, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, or caste. The same is true of Yolngu religion. My Wawa Putima of the Wangari clan, who adopted me back in the 1980s, speaks of the love that Yolngu have for all peoples. While a devout Christian, in his eyes, everything that exists and all that happens finds meaning first within the totemic framework and the interplay of opposing moieties. In this case, in the Yolngu context, Dua and Irija. You can't have one without the other. Just like no men without women, no women without men. This is a point that I'll return to a little bit later. I'm sort of about here. Now, there's no gender discrimination in Yolngu cosmology. men and women are equal. In fact, there are many traditional Yolngu stories where women have primary roles. The most famous, stories, of course, are about the Yolngu sisters from the Dormoidy, who came from the east at the dawn of time with the rising sun, naming the animals and sea creatures and defining the principles of human life and culture as we know them. The Dormoidy is defined by their legacy. Everyone descends from them. Dua through their father, Yiddicha through their mother. This is actually a picture of the Gala homeland. We're going to talk a little bit about a place just up here called Yolngu. Just near Gunther's outstation at Yolngu, where I used to teach primary school, there are massive sand hills, sand dunes that look directly east over to the Westfield and beyond. It's a very special place for the Dormoidy. I remember asking the old Gulmage leader who lived there if this was a sacred site, and he told me that the Yolngu sisters had rested at that very spot and left something of themselves deep beneath the sand, and you could feel it. It's a very special place. It's a quiet place, and the solitude encourages you to look deeply within yourself for truth. It's a carving of the Yolngu sisters. One of the most famous stories linked to the Yolngu is that of the female Banumbir, the morning star or Venus. As the conference briefing notes mention the stars, that dimension of cosmology, I thought I would throw in that story about the morning star. So Banumbir lived at Buralku, which is the dual land of the dead, and she wanted to help guide the Yolngu sisters in their creational exploits. But her powers would not extend beyond Buralku, so the elders tied a string to her, and each morning before dawn, she would head out across the sky. With daybreak, she would be pulled back to her home in Buralku. I asked some colleagues if they had the photograph. Presumably, this is a picture of the morning star on the long string. But I've yet to get that fully confirmed. So they pull her back. So this rock painting shows the celestial path of the morning star. It's very clever because if you look at Venus in the night sky for any length of time, and you really have to be living under the stars in order to do this. If you've got a roof over your head, you're probably not going to see it. But if you look at Venus in the night sky for any length of time, you'll see that it moves in opposite directions, east and west, against the fixed backdrop of stars. It must have inspired a lot of curiosity for Yolngu stargazers in the past, as it did from just about every other people. Ancient Greeks called the planets wanderers for this reason, and Romans called Venus a goddess. Astronomers today will say that Venus is retrograde when it turns direction, but Yolngu had their own explanation. In many ways, when I look at the way that Aboriginal religion is portrayed in academia even, and in the popular media, it seems to me that it's often dumbed down to the level of almost kids' stories, which I think does a great disservice to Aboriginal thinkers. I'm sure you can think of those oversimplified stories of Dreamtime animals. They travel from A to B and then something happens, explaining some aspect of reality. I was just rereading David Goodwill's Dreamtime stories, which to me are like bedtime stories. I mean, they're good stories. For example, the creation of the sky or the Barramundi and so on. But they all follow the same pattern. They're all set in the deep past, which is the point of reflection in the mirror. And it's forever fixed in time, that vision, forever fixed in time. In my work with Burramara, I wanted to see how Arnhem Land's great philosophers used totems to negotiate periods of change, like the rising waters after the last ice age, or to resolve problems associated with, or contradictions associated with new events that might upset the status quo, like explaining the presence of non-Aboriginal. I'll give a few examples from my study of the Dingo. which are inspired by the Bayani legacy. So Australia-wide, apart from the rainbow serpent, the dingo has more stories about it than any other totem. As Claude Lévi-Strauss said, it is very good to think with. The dingo has been used by mythmakers for thousands of years as a tool for considering those big questions that we talked about earlier, like what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to have a culture and live by the law? As anthropologist Debbie Rose said, the dingo makes us human. So you may be familiar with well, it's a very famous story of first contact between Yolngu and the Mocassins, and how the dingo comes out to meet them. It's the outside or public story of Durandura, and I first heard it at Shepherd's College during the culture classes. It's a story of defiance in the face of outside intrusion. True to its antisocial nature, the dog rejects all the Mocassins' gifts, like matches, carpets, rice. The dog doesn't want anything to do with it. It's a black male dog, and he is acting on behalf of his Yolngu masters. And he prefers his own way of doing things, even though the dingo recognizes the inferiority of rubbing two sticks together to make fire, or of his fragile bark canoe when compared to the dugout sailing canoe. He knows this. It's not of the same. The dog speaks the Gupapingal language, and he represents the law of those people. The Mocassin is very insistent, and he offers everything to the dog. But Durandura won't have anything to do with it. In the end, the exasperated Indonesian says, "You could have everything that I have. And why do you reject these things?" And the dog says, "Well, if I have everything that you have, then I would be the Mocassin, and you would be the Yolngu." And on that note, they split up. They go their separate ways. The Mocassins go home to Makassar, and the dog returns to the long grass. So there's no mention of women yet. None at all. So we're around about here.
Yeah.
So in the many published versions of this story, the end is always the same. There is no exchange of sacred items or gifts, and there is no alliance. Each partner has their own land, culture, and ways of doing things. The Gupapingal did not allow Mocassin boats to land in their territory at Howard Island. It was called Maregi Siki by Mocassins, meaning a dangerous place. Maregi means Australia. Siki. And they knew, the Mocassins knew that if they landed there, the Yolngu would come. And yet, this is a conundrum, this is a puzzle, because Yolngu on Howard Island still had access to all of the Mocassin trade goods, as did all of the clans in Northeast Arnhem Land. How is this possible if the dingo and other totems like the honeybee and the scrub fowl rejected them in different narratives all along the coast? Every totem is brought into play, it's mostly the dingo, but they all meet the Mocassin. You know, the scrub fowl kicks down the Mocassin's house, the honeybee stings the Mocassin, they drive them into the sea. So they're all stories of rejection. So how is it possible that there was trade across the length and breadth? The sudden appearance of technologically superior people and highly mobile outsiders was a major challenge for the even if they really did want those goods, the axes, the knives, the tobacco, they could not initially find a way of accepting them in a manner that would not compromise traditional beliefs. They had to think on their feet. They knew in order to be accepted, both the foreigner and their material possessions and their beliefs, including Islam, had to find a place within the Yolngu cosmos. They had to bring it inside. All of these things. How did the Yolngu philosophers use totems to meet the challenge? They knew that they could only do this through linkages to the Bayani clans, like the Warramiri, Wangari, Bilakiri, who owned the special laws, explained the meaning and presence of outsiders on our shore. So this is one example now of how they did it. So at the end of the Durandura narrative, the dog sees a cloud of smoke coming from the land of its grandparents, its mine, at the northern tip of Elkowa, Nangimura. And it heads off across the straits from Howard Island to visit it. he smells something different, something he's never smelled before. It is a whale carcass being cut up by the visitors with their long noses. On its journey north, the dog is transformed. The black male dingo becomes a white female dog, who now starts to speak the Warrameri language. She accepts the new foods and goods from the visitors, a necklace and a fishing line, but only under certain conditions, and saying these still belong to you. The white female dog, like her black male alter ego, was a staunch advocate of Aboriginal law. She lived for the Yolngu. From Burramara's perspective, while this exchange might have been a mandate for the intermarriage of Yolngu women and foreign men, and all that flows from that, it was also a statement that Yolngu law would stay strong in the face of change because Durandra's loyalties could never be challenged. The Yolngu would not be overrun by the new, losing control of their lands or their bodies as the influence of newcomers steadily grew. As Burramara would say, Yolngu for Yolngu and Makassa for Makassa. He said this is the Baini law from the outside, but there is also an inside truth, and I'll come back to that shortly. What sort of history can we draw from this scenario? Tree pain does not feature in these stories, so they're probably much older, predating the Macassans. Yolngu intercultural history, as I was taught it. Oh, I've gone too far. Did I jump a slide? I did. Oh, I don't know how you go back. Well, it doesn't matter. Yolngu intercultural history, as I was taught, is marked by the visits of a series of groups, beginning with the black-skinned whale hunters from the north of the Westlands. Oh no, there isn't one. All right, maybe it's still good. The black-skinned whale hunters from the north are the first group of visitors. They were followed by the golden-skinned people called Baini, the tall, bearded men associated with the female deity. Then came light-skinned Macassans and white Japanese and Europeans. The passage of time, yes, talking about thousands of years here, the passage of time was marked in these stories by the changing skin colour of the visitors. As they became ever lighter, from black to white over time, relations with the Yolngu deteriorated. They got worse and worse. Black visitors had relations of near equality with Yolngu. White-skinned visitors had unequal relations. We need to turn that around. This was the entire message of Burramara for my PhD thesis, which was called Can We Be Equal in Your Lives? We need to turn that around. In the inside Baini stories that Burramara followed, the riches that should belong to Yolngu have been denied. As owners of the land and observers of the law, the Yolngu should be in possession of the canoes, the axes, and the cloth. So in history, the Macassans were seen as merely the vehicle for bringing to Yolngu the wealth that was really their own. That's why Durandra was able to accept the gifts. It's like the interplay between Dua and Yiddish loyalties. Only in partnership with the other could the riches be unlocked and by their proper owners. This is the Baini legacy. So I've given you an intercultural timeline, and of course there's a growing, mounting evidence to support the timeline that Burramara shared with me. The Kilauea coin, of course, 5 now on the Western Islands, dating back 700 to 900 years. There's paintings of whale hunter canoes that material cultural artifacts that provide evidence. The swivel gun that was found down at Dundee Beach, of course, has been lying on the seafloor there for 300 years. It's a complete mystery. The metals, as Mike Owen at the back will tell you, the metals that constitute the swivel gun, so this is the gun that sits on the side of the boat, swivel like this. The metals itself come from southern Spain. That doesn't mean it's Spanish, it may well have been reworked in Indonesia. But anyway, this is all part of the mounting evidence, and of course, studying the oral history and the mythology associated with whale hunters also gives a lot of information about this past. Origine here, his name comes from the whale hunter. This is all, great evidence of that content. something called the Boosted jar, very mysterious, found down here at Shoal Bay, which is could well be 500 years old. So we're getting all these sort of clues. But I want to go back to that a little bit closer at this story of acceptance of by Yolngu. So Yolngu accepts, the white female dog Yolngu accepts these gifts. In what may seem as an appeasement was in fact a brilliant strategy by the Yolngu thinkers going back to an epiphany by the Warramiri leader Ukaleke, more than 2 centuries ago. Wurundjeri explained this to me in detail because he wanted the intellectual prowess of his forebears to be acknowledged and the Bayani agenda of equality to be realized. So not only did this philosophy facilitate trade across Northeast Island, including to those people in the interior, like the Wagalak or the Ritama, it ensured the survival and the growth of Yolngu people. According to Wurundjeri, without these new laws, these Bayani laws, the Yolngu would have been wiped from the earth or become slaves to the outsiders. This was a very real fear. Some Yolngu had tried seclusion as a means of dealing with a changing world, but they became extinct in the wake of contact through introduced diseases and infighting. This new strategy of Yolngu and Bayani allowed the Yolngu to accept the best from the rest of the world on their own terms, while not losing sight of their identity. So, while these narratives might seem like an anachronism, the guiding principles remain relevant and inspirational. Think of the concept of two-way learning, which is very much a part of the Gawa tradition, driven for the most part by Yolngu women, where both Yolngu and Ballada curriculums are followed. This is the Bayani lens, if you're looking through that prism. Think of wonderful women-led programs in Northeast Island, like Yalu or Hope for Health, which is based on the same principle of working together for the common good. Even this conference, which celebrates Yolngu beliefs in a cross-cultural setting, is an example of the Bayani heritage. So I wanted to show you how central Yolngu women have been as mediators in the history of cooperation, resistance, and change in Island. In the 21st century, there are renewed calls for justice, rights, and a treaty by Yolngu. Reconciliation in a Bayani-inspired scenario means equality, that Yolngu really are the true owners of the land and sea, and are indeed equal in Ballada non-Aboriginal lives. Here. Thank you. Thank you.